Elementalist mains rejoice! We won't be waiting another month to try out our new elite spec. Anet just dropped this teaser silhouette for the third new elite spec we'll get to try out in the next beta. There's a lot to talk about here. The hammer was leaked, but having it confirmed is nice, and we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But that's not what has everybody riled up about this teaser. What the heck is that thing? But first, a disclosure. Everything henceforth is speculation, no facts have yet been confirmed, and the only thing this video will be doing is guessing based on the single provided teaser and knowledge of current gameplay mechanics and cool shit from other games. Good. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about some wrong opinions. First off, mine. After Hammer got leaked, my first thought was Guardian-like gameplay with short-range AoE control, and that led me to think that this new Elementalist might be getting symbols. When I first saw this thing, I was at work and kind of busy and thought it looked like a symbol on a cape. Symbol ELE confirmed? Well, no. When you look closely, this thing is clearly a three-dimensional shape. It looks kind of like a gyroscope, but we'll get into that later. Second, in case any of you are in denial, yes, this is definitely Elementalist. It's light armor, the color scheme matches previous official artwork, and Hammer ELE was already leaked. It really can't be anything else, so let's talk details. New slot skills. Is it possible we're getting symbols despite that bauble not being a symbol itself? Well, kinda. I think it's much more likely to be Wells, though. The bauble... You know what? It needs a name. I'm thinking Bob. Bob the bauble. Sounds good to me. Anyways, Bob could act like a scrapper's gyro and drop Wells around himself. Though, if all he does is chase the player around, it might feel too much like Scrapper. It would be really cool if you could control where he goes like a Ventari's tablet, but ELE already has enough buttons to press, so I don't think they would do that unless they make a big change, like maybe taking some of the attunements away. Regardless, Wells are definitely a possibility, so what else is there? Well, psionics were just introduced as a new type of slot skill with the Virtuoso Mesmer, and they could easily have been called something that we already have, like summons or conjures. Plus, Bob is pink, just like the psionic daggers of the Mesmer. I think psionics are on the table, so what might they look like? It would be easy to just make them a better version of the ELE arcane skills, but we know Anet wouldn't do that. Assuming they act similar to the Virtuoso psionic skills, they will be an AoE that has a cast time activation and then stays in place for longer than the cast time, pulsing their effect. It would be easy to design and not too complicated to play if the ELE just sends Bob out to the target area when you use a ground target psionic. They could even implement some psionics that aren't ground target, and Bob could just give you a hug when you cast those. Other slot skill types, gadgets, meditations, and commands are arguably possibilities. Commands especially could be fun if Bob is sentient. If it's gadgets, it probably means that the gyroscope shape isn't Bob's only form. A magical gyroscope could be a gadget designed by some arcane Magitech engineer. There could easily be 5 more gadgets the new ELE could pull out that all have different effects, kind of like how the Tempest Shout skills work now. There has been some sentiment expressed that I disagree with, but is valid, that there is a place for a simpler, easier to play Elementalist. One way they could do that would be by using something like gadgets in place of attunements. You could have one gadget for each element, and Bob could be like an arcane gadget that interacts with your slot skills in whatever form they take. I really hope they don't go that route. While it could help players that don't like the complexity of the class experience ELE for the first time, it would be a disappointment to a lot of ELE mains like myself who enjoy the complexity. Weaver may have been a bit overboard, so maybe don't go that complicated, but I hope they don't take away any of the complexity either. And they probably won't. That's a lot of work to downgrade one elite spec. They could only take away 1 or 2 attunements at a time, and unfortunately I think that would work if their goal is to make ELE more accessible. I just really hope they don't. It would be cool if the attunements act the same, but while you're in an attunement, Bob changes form and has 1 new ability per attunement. Alternatively, Bob could store an attunement so that you could swap to it, use 1 or 2 skills, and then get kicked back to your previous attunement without them all going on cooldown. There's all kinds of cool stuff Bob could do, from summoning effects to just being a turret. Bob could also be a spirit in a cage of some sort. If you've played Dota within the past few years, Dark Willow comes to mind for the theme of this one. She carries around the shell of a lantern that houses a nature spirit or pixie or something, and her ultimate ability releases it and it flies around her, machine gunning down everything nearby for a few seconds. Which, sounds awesome! I'm also thinking maybe when you release Bob from the cage, you go through some kind of transformation, kinda like a druid. Maybe swapping attunements gives you arcane energy and you can activate the arcane attunement after charging enough energy or something. Whichever way they go, I just can't wait to find out what this thing is. There is some deep design philosophy that interests me, looking at the current elite specs and guessing about the future. Tempest was designed to feel better about camping one attunement by rewarding the player with overload skills and punishing switching, especially after overloading, by locking that attunement for longer. Weaver was the opposite. Weaver punishes the player for camping one attunement with long cooldown weapon skills, and rewards the player for switching by giving unique buffs and making attunement swaps shorter cooldown. So already there's a spectrum of playstyles. Base ELE is in the middle with very few rewards but very few detriments to either playstyle, while Tempest likes to stay in one attunement longer and Weaver likes to swap as often as possible. Hammer ELE is going to upset the balance no matter where it falls on the spectrum, but I'd like to think about where it might fall for a minute here. They could try to put it in the middle by using a system that makes very few changes to the attunements, for example adding a 5th arcane attunement. The playstyle would be very close to base ELE. They could even add some traits that reward faster swapping and some that reward camping, and that kind of design philosophy is probably a bad sign. The best way to implement that would be to make the traits wildly different and both very powerful, and by doing so upset the balance between classes. The worst way would be to make the traits weak, and by doing so keep everything in balance for now by pushing the problem down the road. I fear that if that is what they choose to do, they'll never decide that they can upset the balance, and every ELE elite spec from now on will kind of be in the middle, not very much different from each other at all. I hope they choose to place Hammer ELE off to one side. Which side? I don't really have a preference. If they choose to reward quick swapping by doing something like charging a powerful ability by swapping more often or allowing brief dips into a stored attunement, I hope it's not quite to the extent that Weaver does. However, if they choose to reward camping by giving a stacking buff or decreasing the available attunements, I hope they do it more than Tempest did. Everybody is going to have their own opinions here, but the next spec can always put the spectrum back in balance and we can have fun in the meantime. Let's talk about Hammer. There are currently 4 hammer-wielding classes in the game. Revenant is the outlier, so we'll get to them last. The other 3, Warrior Guardian and Scrapper Engineer, do what you would expect a hammer to do. Bop, bash, and smash, with lots of knockback, melee control, and damage. Warrior and Guardian just hit stuff. Guardian's 5 skill traps people in melee range, but it's mostly just knock them down and bop them in the head. Scrapper is much the same, but they get a turbocharged electrified power hammer. Revenant is very interesting. They kind of get a spectral ghostly hammer. Their auto attack is ranged, and most of their attacks either use the mists or summon spirit hammers to go for long range pressure. Obviously, there's a lot they could do with the elementalist hammer. Being that there isn't a single Kandi hammer spec in the entire game right now, that could be a very interesting niche to fill. The elementalist fire and earth attunements both fit very well with a Kandi hammer spec, and wells or symbols could be very good for Kandi damage as well. Psionics probably wouldn't fit this super well, as they feel like they should do confusion or torment or something like that, which doesn't fit the elementalist feel. There is another niche, the boon support, that a psionic hammer could do really well in. Quickness or alacrity could both be very good additions to a psionic elementalist, and hammer would benefit heavily, being a very slow weapon by default. Hammer itself could have a lot of boon support skills like might, fury, protection, and vigor, as well as some helpful crowd control abilities that DPS players hate to bring along. I think it would make sense as well, as the elementalist is the first light armor hammer wielder, for them to use some sort of arcane magic to assist with the extra beefy new weapon. I'm not saying elementalists are weak, just that their strength isn't always in their muscle. I think alacrity would probably fit best with the elementalist, but would be very hard to balance. Elementalist is an incredibly overpowered class, but most of what it can do is locked behind attunement swap cooldowns, which get shorter with alacrity. If you think about it, ELE can technically weapon swap to 4 different weapons in the same amount of time any other class can swap from one to the other and back. With alacrity, it's even faster. Alacrity is incredibly powerful for ELE already, but because it requires a support to get it, it only needs to be balanced in high-tier, mostly PvE game modes. If an ELE can give itself alacrity, it has to be balanced for all game modes and all skill levels, which is no small task. For this reason, I do believe there is a chance we will be seeing a quickness support build. The main problem with that is that we already have a hammer-wielding quickness boon support elite spec, the Scrapper. It wouldn't really feel right, especially since the quickness was just recently added to that build. So, I'm thinking alacrity is a better fit. But who knows? They could disappoint me yet again by giving it neither. I just hope we at least get some sort of unique boon. Anyways guys, that brings me to my predictions. If you ask me right now, with the small amount of information we have, what is this elite spec? I would say this is a mid-range Condi Hammer ELE that uses an arcane spirit companion to summon wells to give out boons, namely alacrity, to allies. Obviously, every class and every elite spec can fill many roles and in many different ways, but from a high-level PvE-focused perspective, I think that is what this build will be designed for. That's all I have for you today, guys. I really want to start a conversation here with all of you, so please like and comment on the video so more people can see it. I've been in ELE main since Heart of Thorns, and I am so hyped to see what we get this time around. I really want to hear your opinions too, even new players. If you think this looks like a cool concept from another game, let's hear it. Thanks for coming everybody, and have a great day.